my cold opening doesn't sell as well if you're sitting there staring at me the whole time. Do not lick my elbow this time. Hello everyone, Afrodo Reviews here, helping you decide, is that book worth reading over second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of... I thought we talked about this. The fiery pits of Mount Doom. We talked about this. Happy Are Those Who Mourn is a book by Father Andrew M. Greeley. I believe that's how you're supposed to say his name. And published on December 1st of 1995. This is the 7th book in the Blackwood Ryan mystery series, which I didn't know was a thing, to be completely honest with you. Which is a mystery novel based around the bishop known as Blackwood Ryan. Now, as I've said before, I do not like starting books in the middle of a series, but with detective books I can make an exception. Most mystery novels sort of like this, especially the Harlequin ones, more or less written with the sense that you should be able to pick them up at any time and read it and not be left out of the loop. And anything I say about this book later on, I will give it the credit that I would not have been able to tell that this was a long-standing book series. This is a very good standalone work for something that's 7th in the series. With only a few things that I kind of looked at and thought, this has got to be relationships carrying over. There isn't really much for me to speak about when it comes to the background of the book otherwise, though. It doesn't have any awards that I found, and it wouldn't be on the Garb August first book of the month if it was something that was well-renowned. So, that being said, here's your report card. And now we move on to the cover. Now, the cover of this book is kind of poor, to be completely honest with you. You'll understand it more as I get into it, but when you look at this cover, you notice 3 things, because there's only 3 things worth noticing. You see the stained glass window in the background, this beam of light coming down onto a candlestick. Now, all in all, at first, the way it's set up is also not very good. On a glance, it sort of looks like someone smashed out the stained glass window because of the way the body in the window is framed. Like, at a quick glance, you're just kind of like, oh, someone smashed that out. And it's kind of like video game cutscenes where it's smashed out, but you can't see anything but blackness beyond it. But it's not smashed. And, of course, you got the beam of light going down on the candlestick. And the candlestick isn't relevant to the story. It pops up often, but it's not relevant to the story. The only thing I can really give the book credit on this front is that it sets the tone very well, that it's going to be religious in its narrative. That's about all I can really say that this cover prepares you for when it comes to this particular mystery novel. But being a Harlequin book novel, it's really not something I can say is awful. Like, it's bad, don't get me wrong, but it's a Harlequin book, and you know what? They don't have a long track history of being good. Even Snow Job, a book that I more or less enjoyed, and Hit Me With Your Best Scott. Both of those were Harlequin books, and even if I liked something like Hit Me With Your Best Scott, the cover was nothing to write home about. Now, a quick synopsis. Now, for those of you who are just watching my channel for the first time today, note that I always read the back of the book, namely show you how the book presents itself, on my TBR video. And if I remember, I'll obviously put the card up. I tend to forget quite often, But for the sake of this review, and for the context of what I'm about to talk about, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of the TBR here. However, that being said, if you're interested in seeing how the book presents itself, or you're interested in seeing the coming reviews this Garb August, feel free to check out my TBR video and, watch it all the way through. Also, if you just want to give me your views, because I'll always accept a view. Anyways, that being said, what is this book about? So, as I said before in the earlier parts of my video, this book is the 7th in the series. So I can't provide any context or describe what the series in general is like. So I can only really tell you about what this book is about. Now, this book is about Bishop Blackwood Ryan, who prefers to go by Blackie, going down to the St. Peter's and Paul, it's a church or a chapel. It's been a long time since I was Catholic, guys, so because it seems to be haunted by the former pastor there that was named Monsignor Charles McKerney, or Old Charlie as they call him, or Jolly Charlie. That's what it was, Jolly Charlie. Now, the haunting seems to be happening because they fear that he may have been murdered. And this is him trying to reach from beyond the grave and get people to look into his murder. That is not what this book is about. I'm going to be straight right now. I'll talk about this in depth later, but that is not what the book is about. The book is really about when Bishop Blackwood Ryan goes down to the St. Peter's and Paul and begins to investigate, realizing that the expense reports from the church is way too low for something they should be doing, and realizes that at least $10 million in church funds have gone missing. And looking into it, discovering it says conspiracy on the back, but it's really not a conspiracy. Just discovering what happened to it. And that's pretty much the bulk of the book. And that's where I'm going to kind of break off here and just go straight into the review, because I have a lot to say on this book. Needless to say, unlike Snow Job or, Hit Me With Your Best Scott, I wasn't pleasantly surprised with what I was going into the book for. I don't know if this was just because those two books, although not being great, raised my expectations of the typical Harlequin. I did not enjoy myself in this book. The first, obviously, is what I mentioned earlier. The story says it's about one thing, but it's about something completely different. Look, I know that in a lot of mysteries, you start with something innocuous, something that looks like it's straight and cut, and then you make it more and more complicated before tying it all back in at the end. I'm no stranger to that. But it's that type of plotline is a staple of the mystery. But this book doesn't do that. This book claims to be about a unalive pastor who is coming back to haunt the parish that he's in because he may have been murdered and wants it solved. That's not what the book's about. The book is about Bishop Blackwood Ryan trying to find missing church funds and stumbling upon something a little bit bigger than he anticipated. In fact, I would even go so far and say the two plots are not connected. You snip out everything to do with the ghost, and the bulk of the book is pretty much exactly the same. The ghost does not make any form of actual impression. It's just kind of there. It's just kind of there. It serves as a frame. It serves just as a way to get Blackwood there, and that's it. Once Blackwood is there, it more or less should have just been dropped or been revealed to be fake this whole time as a way to get Blackwood there, because it otherwise doesn't make any sense. It even goes so far as to say the murder of the Jolly Charlie is also not connected to the plot. It really isn't. The murder of that previous pastor has absolutely nothing to do with the bulk of the book. In fact, the whole embezzlement plotline is completely wrapped up and had absolutely nothing to do with the actual murder. And again, I'm aware that in detective fiction it's common to do that kind of thing. To do the looking into this, and it looks like it's all connected before, oh no, a switch. It turns out that the murder was completely unconnected, and it just happened to be a great consequence that it led to this bigger crime taking place. But this book doesn't handle it well. Because, again, the ghost and the murder plot didn't tie in at all. He's not, our main character Blackwood is not looking into any of these. He's looking purely into the embezzlement. And that's what he cares about. And it just so happens that along the embezzlement plot, I guess this is what happened to him. But that's not the only fault of the mystery. I think even if this was actually about the ghost and actually about the murder, it would still be one of the most boring mystery novels that I've ever read. I've talked a lot about bad mysteries on this channel. In fact, I think there's only one mystery I've actually enjoyed, and that's one of those tried and true classical mysteries that I read. That was Agatha Christie. Some of them I've labeled terribly boring, like The Da Vinci Code or Murder in the First Degree. But honestly, none of them even come close to how boring this one was. Nothing happens in this book. The bulk of the investigation is Blackwood Ryan going up to a person of interest, talking to that person of interest, overplaying his hand of what he knows, leaving, going to talk to another person of interest, talking to that person of interest, overplaying his hand on what he knows, leaving, going to talk to another person. You get what I mean. That's all that happens through most of this book. And the last, 80, 90 pages, things do start happening. The mystery starts getting more and more complex. But by then, you're just so unengaged that you're just sort of like, why couldn't this have happened in the middle? Why couldn't that have sudden, they just found this person of interest with their brains blown out on the ground. And it looks like he's not actually involved. Or he was involved and they silenced him. That's what you're supposed to use these for. But again, No, in fact, that whole plot line doesn't connect to the embezzlement plot line either. It connects in the thinnest way, in the way that if they were doing a mystery, you would think it's this one motive this whole time, but the twist is it's this motive instead. And you know what? I'm not even joking. One of these conversations where he just sits there and talks to the person of interest is about 53 pages of this book. And that doesn't sound like a lot. Actually, you know what? I may have been generous earlier when I said 80 to 90 pages. It was actually probably closer to 40 pages where the interesting stuff started happening. This book, one of these conversations is 53 pages of this book. Now, they may not sound significant, but this book is only 288 pages long, which means 53 pages is more than 20% of this book. So, yeah. Well, a little under 20%. I'm not going to do the exact math now. I'm just trying to prove a point here. But a little under 20% of this book is just one character sitting here talking to another character. Even books I called boring in the past, Da Vinci Code, even books I called boring in the past, knew to throw things in throughout the story to make it interesting. Da Vinci Code had Robert Langdon fleeing from the French police as he found out they planned to basically frame him for the murder. You know, Murder in the First Degree had Hitchcock getting run down by someone trying to cover up the crime that he's currently looking into. Snow Job had Reed dealing with the villain, you know, putting his dog in the pound and trying to get it quickly put down as a consequence for going against him. There were things happening, things our hero needed to respond to, things that made them active protagonists. None of that happens here. Absolutely none of that. Again, they go to location, they have conversation with person of interest, they leave. Even something like Summer Night and the Dresden Files, which follows the same basic concept where Dresden is just going from place to place to talk to people and try to figure out the mystery, did it better. Things were happening in between the conversations that were worth noting, that kept adding to the mystery, that kept, thinking, oh, he's really in danger, he needs to be careful. And to be fair, though, Dresden Files is an urban fantasy book about a likable protagonist, and Bishop Blackwood Ryan has absolutely no fucking personality in this book. Now, let's go with that. I'm willing to accept that this might be because I haven't read the other books in this series, but Blackwood has almost no personality to speak of. It's actually baffling that when I was doing my research on this book and I went to Goodreads, I saw several reviews talking about how great Blackwood's personality was, how much they liked his personality, and I'm reading this and I'm thinking, what personality? In fact, for the first 20 to 30 pages, Blackwood had so little personality in that page, I kept forgetting that this book was set in the first person. This book is told by the first person, and through the first 20 to 30 pages, I repeatedly thought, wait, this is first person, right? Because it felt like I was reading a third-person book with a very unbiased narrator. And I will admit, it gets better near the end. Blackwood does get a little more personality than he starts with, but not a lot. One of the only reasons that this happens is because Blackwood very rarely interrupts the narrative or the conversations to introduce his own thoughts on the matter. He basically just responds, and I'm probably going to hate these words in the future. He just responds with, arguably, indeed, interesting. That's pretty much all he does for a bulk of these conversations. And since the conversations are 90% of the book, it tells us nothing about Blackwood. And when he does show personality, when he does give his own opinions on something, I'm left there confused. Because, yes, Blackwood, maybe okay, there's this one scene right here. There's this one line right here that emphasizes really well what I'm talking about. Where it's just like, I'm sitting there reading it and I'm like, what? Indeed, the name is so pervasive that when I answer the phone, Father Ryan, many of the folk from the cathedral parish seem unaware that there is anyone in the parish staff with that name. Perhaps the reason that I am such an unremarkable and inoffensive person is that when people enter an elevator on which I am being borne earthward or heavenward, they don't even notice my presence. Yes, Blackwood Ryan, you're unremarkable because you're unremarkable. That didn't tell me anything. You just repeated, maybe I'm unremarkable because I'm unremarkable. Oh, but then there's darker examples of this. Like, Blackwood Ryan will say something, and I legitimately have to sit there and think, was that racist? Or is he making fun of racists? What he says is undeniably racist. But is he the context around it almost feels like says he's mocking this attitude. You know, it's sort of like, but the problem is, again, there's so little personality in it that I can't tell for sure. Like, for there are 2 public grammar schools and a junior high in the village itself. For those who do not want to send their children to the township high school, Butternut Township North, which is 20% minority. Woodbridge Academy offers quality private education for a huge price within the safe borders of Woodbridge itself. Or this line right here. In Woodbridge, you could pretend that race, crime, blight, pollution, all problems of big city American living did not exist. Not racism, race. So when I read lines like that, I'm sitting here thinking, is the tone I'm supposed to be reading here supposed to be mocking? Like, Blackwood Ryan is sitting there derivatively saying, you can pretend things like race doesn't exist. Or is it just like, you can pretend things like race doesn't exist? Those are so many ways to take it that I'm just sort of like, is this racist or not? When it comes to things like this, things as charged as this kind of comment, you really want to be clear. Either I'm supposed to dislike this character for this point of view, or I'm supposed to be amused because he's taking the piss. You know? I'm not supposed to sit here and think, is our character an awful person, or is he not? Because this is, like, it's just one of those, I don't know. Both are surrounded by elements that could mean Blackwood is making fun of it, or it could be hints to what he really believes. This doesn't clear up anytime in the future. For example, there's a great deal of political correctness mentioned in this book. Not commented on, weirdly enough, but just mentioned. Like, it's just brought up for no reason. It's just politically correct. It just says it. Like, it doesn't offer an opinion on it at all. The supper, nutritious, politically correct, healthy, and unquestionably good for me, had been well prepared and elegantly served. How is supper politically correct? Like, I can see how it can be impolitically correct. Like, you know, and a black person comes over and all you offer them is fried chicken and watermelon. That would be racist as fuck. But this guy, our character's an Irish Catholic. What? How is this politically correct? What? How can a dinner be politically correct? I don't get it. Or this line, like 2 pages later. Father Emile Baptiste de Souza, S.J., who had been forced to abandon his research in India because the government didn't like Catholic priests studying the untouchables, was now doing his anthropology with the Chippewas, Aboriginal Americans, as he had called them, rather than the politically correct but inaccurate name of Native Americans. See, this line also bothers me because incorrect in which way? Incorrect in they're not Native Americans? Incorrect that even some Native Americans dislike the generalization of being lumped together in one large group to be called Native Americans? Incorrect that he believes that they should be called Indians? Incorrect in that he believes they should be called Aboriginals, which isn't what, as far as I know, isn't what we've called Native Americans in our world, in the U.S., but that's what they called the Native Australians, Aboriginal, or the black people. I'm not hugely caught up on Australian, race politics, so that one, I apologize right now if I've said something really bad. But you see what I mean? It says things like that, and I'm just sitting here and left to think, is this being racist or is it not being racist? And that shouldn't be a conversation I have to have with myself. But let's not get too caught up on the confusing things he says. I mean, otherwise I'd have to talk about the way he tries to describe how a girl has braces here, which, here's how he describes someone having braces, by the way. At first you thought 20 years old, but then you noticed the math of orthodontia work inside of her mouth and you realized she was 15 going on 16. Here's an easier way to say that. At first you thought 20 years old, then she had very obvious braces. But anyways, let's get on to my point and give on to Blackwood does very much give his opinion on things. Specifically when he's talking to the main person of interest, a woman named Lynn. I'm trying to remember her full name. Lynn Reed and Jerry the Fourth. I think it's Jerry because it's Gerry. But Jerry the Fourth. And he talks about their marriage. You see, They're married, but they haven't made the beast with two backs. Now, neither are particularly upset with this fact. Lynn just wants a guy who loves her unconditionally the same way Jerry does, and Jerry is perfectly content to have a sexless marriage. It's not that he doesn't want to, it's not that he's asexual, as the book puts it, but rather that he simply has something that doesn't work right when he tries. As far as Blackwood knows, they're both very happy with this arrangement, with Jerry even giving Lynn permission to go out and have an open marriage because he knows she has needs, and to be honest, he kind of wants kids. His only condition is just don't tell me about it. Guess what our lovely pastor says? Guess what our lovely pastor's reaction to this is? You're not married! You have to do the hokey pokey to be married. You know, in fact, by the laws of Catholic Church, you're not married to Jerry. You're married to the guy you're sleeping with behind his back. You know what? That's how I'm going to take it. That's your husband now. Fuck Jerry. That is pretty much what he says. I mean, obviously, I exaggerated a little bit here and there, but my point is, that is literally the line of logic this guy goes through. In fact, it gets to the end where Jerry is killed as part of this plot, and the book, the narrative, and our main character treat it almost like, oh, well, that's a relief. Lynn can finally be with her true husband, the guy she's been sleeping with. And it's just like, they were perfectly happy. Lynn repeatedly said, I'm happy with having an emotional marriage to this guy. Jerry didn't mind what his wife was doing, and you're the asshole for coming in and just saying, fuck you. That's not a marriage. You're not legally married by the Catholic Church's eyes. And don't even get me started on the character of Dr. Stephen Curtin. You know, the actual serial... Okay, I want to put a slight trigger warning here because this is actually kind of awful. It doesn't ever go in depth, but it is brought up and very casually just sort of brushed off. Like, never at one point do I feel like the story is condemning what Dr. Curtin does because it's a horrible thing to do, but rather just because it doesn't align. I never once feel like the story is actually outright condemning what Dr. Reed is doing. It's not saying it's good, but it's definitely not like, oh my god, that's awful. You know what I mean? There's a certain line like, don't do this, but whatever. You know what I mean? Here's the trigger warning. Challenge to not get my video age restricted, starting now. Dr. Stephen Curtin is a person of interest in this case, and is also a serial artist. One character even goes so far, but like I said, the main thing I have an issue with is how the story handles him. Although it brings up the numerous times he's done this to main characters, to just random people, to the point they say he has multiple complaints, and those are just the ones he stepped forward. At one point, one character says, oh, I know he's doing that, but like, I don't really think he has he doesn't have the ability to murder someone. He's not that bad. But this was right after telling a story about how he broke into her house with a bolo knife and threatened to literally very badly hurt her if she didn't do exactly what he said, which obviously he was. And my only thought at this point was like, he is literally the only person so far you've talked to that does have the right mental profile for murder. Like I said, I cannot stress enough how much I hate the fact that this book treats the revelation of what this guy is doing with no more weight than if it just revealed that he had been taking ones out of the donation tray every time it came by him. Yeah, that's an awful thing to do. Don't do that, man. But I'll see you next... you saw the White Sox game, by the way, right? Oh, yeah, that's pretty weird, wasn't it? That's kind of how they treat that revelation, and it's just horrible like that. Horrible actions like this being discussed and not being treated like they are the horrible actions they are just get to me a little. This guy does get a comeuppance later, thank God. If the book had ended without him getting some form of comeuppance, I would have put this book much lower than it ends up being. But watching them speak about this kind of awful event, but not treating it like it's as awful as it is, it's just sort of... It got to me a little. The mystery is kind of bad again. I think I've already talked about this to some extent. and I'll probably end up cutting this if I have. But the way the mystery is structured, it's just not handled well. For example, Bishop Blackie Ryan is brought there because a ghost is haunting the parish and they want him to figure it out. Then he uncovers an embezzlement scheme. He uncovers the idea that the previous pastor may have been murdered. All of these things that look like they're going to kind of link together, but no, none of them link together. The haunting isn't the pastor trying to get his murder solved. The murder of the pastor does not involve the embezzlement scheme whatsoever, and the embezzlement scheme is resolved independently. You know, when people do get killed during the embezzlement scheme, it's not because they're trying to cover their tracks or are they trying to kill all the witnesses so they can't be charged. That's kind of what covering their tracks is. It's not that they're trying to cover their tracks. It's nothing related with the embezzlement scheme. It's a scorned woman who's on a ton of African drugs they don't have names for. The murder of the pastor even gets off completely scot-free when it is revealed who it is, because he has cancer, guys, and you know what? He's going to be dead in a few months anyways. What's the point of bringing him to justice? And you know what? It's not like they can prove it was him, after all. It's not like he confessed in a room of 6 to 7 people watching him. Which happens. When Blackwood Ryan reveals that he knows it was him, the guy was like, yeah, I did it, but how are you going to prove it? The room filled with people hearing him confess this. Remove the haunting, the book's unchanged. Remove the murder subplot, the book's unchanged. Just write the story about the embezzlement subplot and you're good. The last, the only one you can't remove because that's the bulk of the story. It's just a mess. It does this frustrating thing where the character supposedly has the mystery solved for the entirety of the book, but even though it's from his perspective, he never tells us the solving. He never tells us what his suspicions are. He's just like, well, I figured that out. You figured what out? What did you figure out? Tell me. But he doesn't reveal it because it's not dramatic enough in the moment. And unfortunately, when you read a mystery novel where the mystery is anything but satisfying, I'm forced to give this book nothing higher than a 4 out of 10. A sloppy mystery that's boring to read mixed with a ton of elements that make me wonder if I should be offended, along with many that do actually offend me, combined with just odd sentences in general, like using too many words to say something really simple, or referencing elements that never occur. Like there's one point in this book where Blackie Ryan's like, I like the alliteration he puts in a sentence, but there's no fucking alliteration in the sentence he's talking about, and it's kind of like, what? Ultimately, it's just not a good book, which is why it deserves Mount Doom. Literally, I cannot think of who to recommend this book for, apart from a very niche group of people wanting to see a pastor solving church-based mysteries. That's it. Like, I don't even then, it feels like it would feel on the same wavelength of recommending Night Flight to someone who wants a Christian-based kid book. Yeah, it'll fit what exactly you're looking for, but I still wouldn't recommend reading it, really. It's not satisfying in any way. I mean, honestly, you do have to have an understanding of the Catholic Church hierarchy to get through parts of this book, because it's just kind of like bang, 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 bang with the references. And like as someone even like me who was raised Catholic, but hasn't really immersed himself in a Catholic world for very long, for about 10 years, admittedly. Longer than 10 years, but the point is, I haven't been Catholic for a long time. Was kind of lost at points because of just how much it was bang, 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 bang with Catholic stuff. Honestly, it's just, that's all I got to say. This book has just left me so drained and tiring. It's just, I'm just going to sit here and I'm practically just going to be dead until dark. Just remember, with every book comes an adventure, and every adventure is worth having. Even the bad ones, debatably.